yet? Yes, we are live. We have finally made it. And let me see if I can, okay. Yeah, there we go. There. So we are live now, Kari. Am I pronouncing your name right? Kari or Kari?
Kari. Yep.
Kari, okay.
Kari Tauring in Norwegian. Kari Tauring.
Very beautiful. I like the way that kind of twists and rolls right off.
Yeah.
So I am live here with Kari Tauring. Did I say it right?
You're good. Yeah, that's right.
Almost there. Yeah. Okay. So
It's if you pronounce it in Spanish, it sounds Norwegian.
Okay. So Kari Tauring.
Yeah. Isn't that funny?
At a roll. All right. So we're starting to get a few people on. The thing is, it used to be when you would go live on YouTube, it would automatically show you how many viewers were watching. Now it no longer feeds my ego. So I have no idea. But I do see at least one lovely person in the chat room. And so that means I'm sure there's plenty more. So let me just I need to just adjust this light. Hold on. There we go. That way the light is not immediately in my eyes. All right. So welcome everyone for this session here on my channel, Tommy McGee, Priestess Heart. I'm very happy to be here. And before we get started, I like to bring in the chimes, which I am known for. And I have a couple of people who really enjoy the chimes. So let's go ahead and take a nice deep centering breath and welcome ourselves into this sacred circle today. Here we go. Welcome. Okay, so I have this amazing guest on. We've been waiting for this moment. A welcome Akashic song and welcome Naisha. So this beautiful book that I have right here, I want everyone to see. This book right here, The Runes, A Deeper Journey by Kari Tauring, who is my guest today. And let's see, can I say how I came across this book? I really can't remember, but I love runes. I'll show you guys my personal runes that I made out of local clay here. This was made out of Hawk Mountain clay, and one of my clients has a kiln, and she was so generous to fire my runes in her kiln. And so those are my runes. And my guest today, Kari Tauring, let me share a little bit from her biography on the back of her book. Kari Tauring began studying runes in 1988 as an undergraduate in linguistics, and from the perspective of a Norwegian American looking for her deeper roots. In the decades since, these deep roots have manifest as Volva Stav, a mind-body-spirit practice using sacred body geometry and toning, runes, staff rhythm and voice to create physical alignment with the world tree of Norse cosmology. Healing personal orlog and teaching others to do the same has been Tauring's passion and life work for over a decade. As an interdisciplinary folk artist, she has produced several Nordic roots music recordings, instructional and performance videos, and an interactive application for learning runes and practicing rune chant. She travels widely in the United States and Scandinavia, teaching, performing, and learning from others who are practicing Scandinavian folk root spiritual traditions, including her editor and friend, David DeYoung, who now lives with his family in Finland. And the website is this the website for your book, or is this, yes, Nordic Moon Press? That's you, right, Kari?
Yeah, that's David's, David and my press. Yeah.
Okay, very
But
good.
people can just go to karitauring.com.
There you go. And I will make sure to have the links in the description below once we are finished. So Kari, go ahead and take it over. Would love for you to, introduce yourself to the people in your own unique way and, tell us what you're all about.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. I am really honored to be here.
Thank you.
And I grew up in Minnesota and spent my youth the school year during the school year in Minnesota out near Wayzata, which is just west of Minneapolis. And we had a thick Finnish ethnic enclave out there. Quite a lot of Minnesota was settled by immigrants from Northern Europe. And I think part of it is because the climate here is really similar, but it was also recently opened to settlers when Norway and Sweden and Finland were having overpopulation problems.
Okay.
So land was available here. So one of the first things I want to make sure to do is to thank honor the indigenous people from this land.
Yeah.
I live on Mendota and Midwakaton, Dakota land, right on the river confluence between the Mississippi and the Minnesota River, near Fort Snelling, which is kind of the site of the first federal fort. And so the urlag of the land here is something that feeds my work as well, in terms of being a settler from settler people here. And we will talk more about it, but the debt that I owe, or the shield that I owe to my wonderful existence in this place that I love so much, it means I owe a debt to the land and to the people who came before me. So I just want to start with that. My mother's 100% Norwegian. Her father came from northern Norway, and her mother came from deep in the Sognefjord. I can trace my mitochondrial lineage back to my 10th great grandmother. I know all their names and where they were born. And my 9th great grandmother was born in 1666.
Wow.
I was born 300 years later in 1966. So I have a deep feeling that is one of the, that is the part of the connective tissue of what drives me to do the work that I do.
Right.
When I was growing up, we had loads of cousins. I'm the middle of 5 girls.
Wow.
Lots of cousins, second cousins, my mom's cousins. Everybody stayed within this sort of area of this Norwegian ethnic enclave. So it didn't occur to me that it was a unique thing in the world that I have this deep lineage, because all my relatives do, and they all live. My 4 sisters can also trace their mitochondria back, as well as my female cousins, and things. So when I started to do this work, it really started with as a youngster in our identity as Norwegian. Mm-hmm. Was Norwegian. I call it the 3 L's: Lutheranism,
right,
and Lefse, and Lutefisk.
Okay.
So people don't know what those other 2 are.
Right.
The potato flatbread that we were so proud of, and Lutefisk is dried cod that's dried in lye.
In lye. Seriously, lye.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it preserves it indefinitely. So that was part of why they could survive the 3-month voyage to get here. In order to come, they had to prove that they could feed themselves for 3 months. And so they would pack these fish they were all dry, and then you have to soak the lye out of them and dump the water several times. And then you put enough butter on it and it's all right to eat. But
well, Kari, I will tell you that butter makes everything better.
it's very true. I have to say, I sometimes joke that butter is a sacrament in my tradition, and in a lot of ways it's true, because butter money in the Norse countries, where we did a lot of milking, women owned the cattle, women owned the animals, and butter. If you could have butter money, you could really generate wealth. It was a much more a generator of wealth, more than even spinning or sewing or eggs or cells or anything that women could do. Butter money was the ticket to your independence.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So I told my grandmother one time. So my mom's family farm was in Frederick, Wisconsin, and there were this Norwegian ethnic enclave surrounded by Danes and Swedes, and so there was a lot of kind of difficulty. There's a lot of tribalism in the Scandinavian countries, because there's a deep history, and there's a pecking order of who's the better. So Norwegians weren't even called Norwegian until after 1910.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
They were all called Swedes. Everyone was called, you were either a Dane or a Swede, because Denmark owned Norway for 400 years and kept it as an underdeveloped colony.
Wow.
Which the Norwegians still today refer to as the 400-year night. And then they ceded us to Sweden, and Sweden kept us for a number of years, but then we got a constitution of our own. And we just celebrated Norwegian Constitution Day on the 17th of May. So we say gratulerer med dagen, and that means congratulations on your birthday, Norway.
Oh, thank you for sharing that history. And you mentioned your mitochondria DNA. You know, I guess at this point it's probably about 2 years ago that I did a DNA test, and looking at all of my ancestral DNA, I have Swedish and Norwegian DNA as well. So I'm
Wow.
getting, that piece of me, which I think is probably about 10%, 10 to 12%. So you're giving me, some wonderful history. Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome, cousin.
So go ahead. So congratulations to the birthday. I think that's what you said, right?
Yeah, the birthday in Norway.
400 years.
Yeah.
Right.
So, so being on the farm during the summer times then, so I was always in nature all summer long. And then I was in the suburbs during the school year. And growing up in the suburbs is, I don't know if you have any experience growing up in the suburbs, or maybe some of your guests have, but it's a really awkward place. It's a place where, well, it used to be the country when my parents moved there. The Ridgedale Shopping Mall used to be a bird sanctuary, and then the junior high across the street was a cow pasture. So the suburbs sort of grew up around us, and there's the disparities in the suburbs between the rich and poor is pretty stark. And it's also devoid of other kinds of diversity.
Right.
Its goal, I think, is like complete homogenization of identity. So it's an awkward place to be, especially when you spend all summer long running through the woods barefoot, you know.
Yes, yes. I'm not, I think I probably grew up near the city, more like in the suburbs, but this was in Atlanta, part of my life in Atlanta, and we had a very large wooded backyard. And also, I spend all my summer in the backyard, climbing trees, building forts, going on journeys, and being barefoot. Just no cow pastures, though.
Yeah, nope, that's exactly right. I'm sure that we had a very similar childhood in that when we were called in for dinner, it was up
Yeah.
in a tree, far a wider area. Yeah. So one time I said to my grandma, when I'm sitting in church, sometimes I get really wiggly and because I just want to stand up and sometimes I want to cry and sometimes I want to sing and sometimes I just want to, do something. And so she said to me, well, you know, when Jesus did his most serious praying, he went into nature.
Mm.
To the mountain and he went to the desert and he went to the garden, and she showed me she has this painting, or had, I have it now, this painting of Jesus praying at the Garden of Gethsemane. And she said, so Kari, when you feel like doing some loud kind of praying, you go into nature and then that's where you'll feel the best. And I don't know if she was saying, please don't jump up in church, or there's a string of Pentecostalism in Norway that runs in her husband's family, my grandpa's family. So I don't know if she thought maybe I was gonna like veer off on a bad path, but what she did was gave me permission to communicate with the divine in nature, and that is something that I treasure always, because it really puts one on the path of allowing nature to talk back and to speak with you and to really get a deep relationship.
Right.
In Norse tradition, our relationship with our ancestors and with nature are two of the very deep roots. A lot of people talk about modern Norse paganism, or also true, and they are all interested in which gods came to you, which gods do you serve, and stuff. And really, in the oldest of times, the gods themselves were a third rung thought. The most important thing: who you are, who are your ancestors, and do you continue to have a relationship with them? And then where you are, what is the nature around you, and what is your relationship with the nature?
That's beautiful. It's really about being in your connection to the past, but that past is also right here in your present because of the earth and the nature and honoring that. That's beautiful.
Well, and I suppose that's exactly kind of swings into one of the other sort of misconceptions about Norse tradition that people have. When people were interpreting Norse tradition, they used sort of the Greek model. So the Norns are fate goddesses, but Old Norse didn't have a future tense. And so we didn't have a placeholder for a goddess of the future. We have Urd, Verdandi, and Skuld, whose names are often translated to past, present, future, but whose names are actually translate to what is, what's becoming, and what should by necessity happen. So we are really past-looking people, not the past as a dead thing, but the past as an active principle that we help to create. The goal is to create a good past.
Oh, wow. That's
So
beautiful.
yeah.
The goal is to create a good past.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That's deep. That's really deep.
Yeah. Yeah. it's a beautiful thing, you know, and it really takes the pressure off from a modern brain who been taught that, you know, you're constantly in debt to the past and you can't ever really pay that off. And you're always speculating on the future and trying to plan for something that's way out there. And it keeps you out of the moment. It keeps you so tied up in these other concepts that you can't quite function, I think. And that Nordic perspective, which I often use the spindle to demonstrate what that is.
Okay, cool.
And I don't know if it's time to jump into that or if you have more.
Yes, go right ahead. Would love to learn all about the different tools that you have there.
Yeah, well, so I talk about, one of the things that we talk about is urlog. Urlog. And on my website, there are just so many essays. I'm one of those kind of geeky people where if I'm feeling a little bored, I write an essay.
Okay.
So urlog comes from the word of ur, which is primal. And in the first poem of the Eddas, so the Icelandic Eddas are the poems that were written down in the late 1200s, and they come from the oral traditional stories of pre-Christian Nordic people. And they were written down in Iceland, and while they were written during the Christian era, most scholars consider that the information in them is pretty well what the mindset was in the heathen world. I use the word heathen. That's similar to pagan. Pagan's a Greek word, so I don't use it to identify myself. I try very hard to use only inside identifiers rather than outside identification words.
Mm-hmm.
And it has the double meaning of shining and of the heath. So people from the heath and people who are shining in the way that the goddess shines.
Interesting. So I do see the heath part in heathen. And where's the shining part? Is that the in part or?
It's the height or the height. In the there's a goat on top of the roof of Valhalla, and its name is Heidrun, which means the shining one, and Heid means shining. The part in the Volva where she says, Heidi hana hetto vars til husakom. Shining they call me when I come to their homes. Bolo velspo vikti hundanda. A staff carrier with good prophecy and a wise magic wand. You know, so it's a common term. Sometimes the volur, the staff carrying women, or the spokona, the women of prophecy, would be just simply referred to as Heid.
Oh, okay. All right. So we touched on a couple of other things. Yeah. So I want to hold on to the Volva Stav, but go ahead and tell us about the spindle.
The spindle.
And then we have to go back to the staff carrier.
Yeah. So, well, I can kind of do both because the information comes from the first poem in the Poetic Eddas, the Voluspa, which means the prophecy of the staff-carrying woman. So an Edda means great-grandmother. So these are great-grandmother's stories written in poems about mostly women's words. And the first poem is all of the staff-carrying woman's words.
Oh, right? Wow. Oh my gosh. I'm getting goosebumps because I have my Poetic Eddas here, and I've had them probably for almost 2 years now, but I didn't know where to start or what exactly they were, and you're like shining the light.
Just like a hide. Just like a hide. Shining light. So we think about, so she says, she talks about the creation of the world. And then she says, then come the women wise in all things. Three of them säger under tullistunder. Three of them living under the tree. Urdu hette aina, andra verdandi. Ska ruoskidu skulda aina svidu. First is urd, what is. Second, verdandi, which is a cognitive urd, which means is becoming. Scoring the runes, and skuld is the third. And skuld is, her name means should. So when we talk about it in terms of the spindle and the urlag, the well of origin, or urd's well, carries all the urlag, and it's like the spindle. So each of us is born with a spindle that is already full of stuff that was spun by our ancestors, by all of the our parents and grandparents and their parents, and not just by their DNA stuff, but also who raised us. If we weren't raised by our biological parents, that's in the spin too. If we, whatever they experienced, whether it's wars or famines or departings from the land of origin, all of those pieces are carried in the urlag. And so that stuff can't be unspun. So there are sometimes traumas that get stuck in that urlag that we can't unspin, but what we can do is observe them and see what part connects to what, and come into a different relationship with those traumas, so that we, when it's our time to spin, don't have to unconsciously repeat those pieces.
Yes.
So that's what urd represents. And it's an active principle. When let me just get it started just a little bit here. When I start my spinning, we kind of wind it up so that there's this kind of energy. You can, you know how it kind of bunches itself up a little bit. So that's the past. The past is this active principle ready to spring forward. Verdandi is the point between the spun and the unspun stuff. So we hang on to the present moment until we have done what we should do, which is to properly draft out what we want the past to look like.
Oh my goodness. Oh.
Yeah. So if I don't
get my spindle out, when we finish this, I do have my spindle in the back that I got as a spiritual practice, and now you're helping me to.
This is, yeah, yay. So what I should do is fix this little funny part here, right? If I want a nice thin thread. But what if I decide that this is the part that's done some damage, and that I don't want to repeat it? I can simply remove the potential of the repeating of that pattern, and then I can say I decide to pull in the bag, and randomly I get, okay, here's a different kind of row. Now I want to hook it on to this one. So I drafted this out and I lay it down, and then when I'm ready and things are as they should be, all I have to do is simply let go, and the past spins itself up. So we're always creating the past. We're never creating the future, but we're always creating good past.
Wow.
And all we have to do is draft out what we want and then let it go. And the past just spins itself up to meet us.
Beautiful. Thank you.
And so all of the cultures of women have always had spinning and weaving as part of our ritual tools. This weekend I was just doing lots of really fun things at the American Swedish Institute for the opening of the Viking exhibit. They have a a group of Viking artifacts that have come from the museum in Stockholm. And it's the first tour of the United States out of Sweden that this collection has had. And oops, now I forgot where I was going with that.
Well, you mentioned the artifacts, or the Viking artifacts. Were you going to go into any of the symbolisms and items that you have behind you as part of the artifacts? And you mentioned the weaving, that women always did the weaving.
Yes, thank you. So one of the things that they always neglect to talk about in these museum things, or in the Viking, all about the Viking era, everybody thinks of the Viking era as this strong, independent men going out and doing this stuff.
Right.
In reality, it took the fleece of 700 sheep to be hand spun, woven, and felled to make one Viking boat sail. So that is an incredible, the sail itself was more expensive than the boat.
Wow.
And it's important for people to understand that if it weren't for mostly wealthy women who were financially supporting this huge industrial enterprise of shipbuilding, and especially the creation of these sails, that and they were mostly doing it for the second and third sons that weren't going to inherit farmland. The whole phenomenon wouldn't have happened if it weren't for these women.
Wow. Yeah,
so,
that's true.
Yeah, it's really important to remember that piece. Yeah. And the exhibit did an okay job of representing women, though they didn't represent. They mentioned how what a game changer the sail was, but they didn't talk about the unglamorous job of sitting and spinning and weaving those sails. We talked a little bit about the more sort of glamorous ideology of women warriors, which there's always been evidence of women on the battlefield in various different positions. And then they talked about the volva, the volur, the plural, the staff-carrying women in the exhibit. Those are sort of these unique and glamorous sounding jobs, when really the hardcore women's work is what supports the whole of society. And I think it's fine to talk about these rare special case women, but I think it's even more important to talk about the everyday labor of women that makes the world work.
Exactly. And the spindle. That's right.
The spindle as the heart of it all, There's a wonderful book that I love and recommend called Women's Work, the First 20,000 Years. And it's all about the women's textiles, particularly in as it moved to Northern Europe. So I really found a lot of spiritual nourishment when I really began working with textiles and thinking about part of what I have done, but it isn't a major thing of full-time occupation, is in doing reenactment. So Viking era reenactment. I did my first sort of like hardcore look at reenactment in the Viking era in 2014. And I was going to Norway to be part of a reenactment camp there. and I wanted to make sure that I was representing really well, you know.
Right.
So I went to this, I have at the Danish Center not far from here are some amazing, brilliant women who have been working in costuming and textiles for decades. So I brought all my basket of cloth and I said, would this work? Would this work? Would this work? You know, and just weeded the cloth out to what was acceptable there and what wasn't. And one of the things that I didn't know about was there was no fast black dye until contact with the Americas.
Oh, wow. Okay.
We had black sheep that we could get a dark, and you could dye it with some walnut to get a nice dark brownish black color. But there was no fast black dye until the 1300s when it was brought back as a root from South America. And so, so that's one of those things that I weeded out of my wardrobe. I said, well, all right, well, I'm not going to bring any then to this thing. So what else is there? So, well, you know, there was no bright red, that really bright red wasn't there. It was madder dyes could make oranges and different kinds of reds and rusty reds and brown reds and brick reds, but not that bright red. And I'm like, well, that's the Norwegian national costume, the bright red vest and the black wool skirt, you know. And they're like, well, Kari, it wasn't Norway back then. Well, all right, okay. So, well, at least I can wear my Norwegian sweater. And they're like, no, there wasn't knitting. I'm like, yeah. So the things that it really messed with my mind a little bit in a really good way. The things that I associated with being Norwegian, you know, the black wool skirt and the bright red vest and the Norwegian sweater and the potato lefse and the coffee, you know, all of these things didn't exist.
Right.
They're not indigenous to my homeland.
Right. And the coffee comes from Ethiopia.
The coffee came from Ethiopia. The tobacco came in, you know, so everyone talks about those, they chew a lot. They do a lot of snus in those countries. And like, that's not part of it either. So, you know, and then the black dye root came from South America and the potatoes came from South America. You know, it's like, okay. So what is real? What is Norwegian? What is it to be from there? And so I've had a really fascinating time sort of getting my brain around that. So those are two things when people say, how do I really immerse in a Norse, in the Nordic mindset? I say, well, first of all, you have no future. Remember, there's no future. Second of all, there's no coffee, potatoes, or fast black dye. And that really disturbs a lot. But I think it's important to go there. And I suppose the third most important thing, and actually probably the most important thing, the number one important thing, is that the sun was always conceived of as a woman, as female, as the goddess, and that the moon was carried by her brother.
Right. That, you know, that is something I've also learned recently, because we always think of the sun as father and the moon as, you know, mother, as feminine, but it wasn't always like that in the ancient world. And then again, you know, there was the sun god and the sun goddess and the moon god and the moon goddess. And so that's very interesting. And
Yeah.
I just wanted to make a comment about, you know, the bright red Norwegian sweater and the black skirt and the tobacco and the coffee. It also can serve to remind us just how much what we think of as ourselves is so intricately interconnected with other cultures, almost to the point where it's so finely woven in that we're no longer cognizant of it until we're made cognizant of it. And so we can understand what is, or, you know, what was and what is now, and have a, I think, an even greater appreciation for our sisters and brothers in different lands, and how we truly are this family that has supported humanity.
Yes, I think that's brilliantly stated. You know, I came across in my research, I dug into the folk songs a lot, and this songs about this sharinga. Well, it gets to talking about the Volva, the staff carrying women, and a lot of what we have is from the Eddas, and especially the sagas. The Eric the Red saga has a full description of what she looked like and what she did. Almost reads like a gossip column, you know, and she had brand new boots, you know, and stuff. And I was saying to my mom, you know, I wish I knew what Gudrid sang for Thorbjorg's ceremony. I wish I knew what those songs were. And she runs out to her piano bench and brings me Mike and Elsie's Norwegian songbook. And it's got this song in it called Just a Little Epsa Will Go a Long Way. You know, and I'm thinking, oh my God, my mom doesn't know what I'm talking about. Well, I open it up, and the first song that comes, that presents itself, is called Sharing Staven, which means the honored lady with a staff. And this is the Volva in folk tradition. So I started looking up other songs with sharing in them. And I found one about dessa gamla sharinga, these old sharing. And it says, de kan spå, they can prophesy. De kan spå, och kaffegryta på tätt skinn och röra och skam in pipastuven sin. So they can prophesy on coffee grounds, potato skins, and the stirrings of their pipes. So these non-native identifier things got so immersed in the culture that they began to use these for prophecy. And I just think that it goes along so beautifully with what you just said about honoring the deep places that those commodities come from, and do we maintain them then in our culture as simply commodities, or and habits that we can't break? Or do we honor them as plant medicines that came to us that the old women knew how to use?
Right. And you know what just came into mind when you just said that? Somewhere, one of the many teachers that I've come across has said that it is humanity, as a human, it is our job to make everything around us sacred. So that's what pops into my mind. So
Yeah.
commodity, and these women made them like a sacred tool. So
Yeah.
can you go a little bit more? I know you sort of mentioned the staff carrier woman, the Volva Stav. Can you really kind of explain what a staff carrier woman is, how that comes out of the Eddas?
Yeah, well, I can do my best. You know, it is, there are a lot of different interpretations of it. To me, the woman who carries the staff is the woman whose job it is to know everything. She's, above all else, she understands, she knows the urlag of things. She knows the urlag of the people that she serves. She knows the urlag of the nature that she communicates with. She is a little like a wandering farmer's almanac. You know, she knows what the past precedence is. And because she's so knowledgeable about past precedents, she can then reveal what should happen, in order to make a healed past, to heal Orlov, or what is potentially going to happen for you to repeat those old patterns. So there's two ways of going with that should idea. And a lot of people really talk about it as Norse shamanism.
Yes.
And shamanism is a word that I don't use because it's not in our lexicon. The word is save or sevu, and that means obtaining a level of consciousness that allows you to perceive the web of weird, which is the intersections of Urlag. It's about creating the ability to journey through the 9 worlds. It creates a state of consciousness where you have the ability to recognize and understand ancestors as they come to you. And it is one of the threads that ties us to the divine, whether it's Freya or Frigg, one of the goddesses, or Eir, the goddess of mercy and healing, or any of the 9 other healing goddesses, or Skuld. For me, I maintain a very deeply connected relationship with the Norns themselves, because I'm working all the time with Urd, Verdandi, and Skuld. Skuld is one of the most, I think, interesting concepts and deified concepts that we have in many ways. She manifests with her sisters in the underworld as a fate goddess. She is listed as the first of the Valkyries under Freya. So she and Eir, who is an underworld deity as well, underworld. The mountain of medicine has its roots in Helheim, in the underworld. And so Eir manifests there and Skuld manifests there. And Eir and Skuld also manifest in the human world as Valkyries. Skuld decides who should and shouldn't live, and Eir either mercifully dispatches or heals as necessary. And they also manifest in the upper worlds, where Skuld shows herself when a deity has or hasn't done what they should or shouldn't do. And Eir is the doctor to the gods. So these are feminine principles that manifest on all the levels of the world tree. And so those are the ones that I work with most closely by nature of being a staff-carrying woman.
Very beautiful. So what started to come to my mind, and I was actually going to ask you to speak a little bit on the world tree. I learned recently, and you can let me know your thoughts on this. I learned recently that in the Norse tradition that humans were believed to have come from trees. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, that's right out of the Prose Edda.
Okay. And I found, I really just recently learned that. And the reason why it struck me so interesting is because, number one, I have a very deep connection with trees. And if you look at any of my past artwork, I haven't painted in a while, but I paint a lot of what I consider to be the tree of life. Mm-hmm. When I was a little girl, there was a dogwood tree in my neighbor's yard right next door. This is down in Georgia, where I'm in Pennsylvania now. Dogwood trees are kind of scraggly and small here, I guess because it's really cold. But down south, the variety of dogwood tree is very, very, it's pretty large, and you can climb up it. So I spent a lot of time climbing in trees and being in trees. I have had stories of where a tree, I hope I don't sound crazy, but I've had trees commune with me, speak to me.
Absolutely.
And
Yep.
I had a mystical experience once where I experienced myself as sort of a fractal. I don't know how to explain it other than, the world was fractalized, and part of this fractal was a tree, and I was the tree, or inside of the tree, or part of the tree. So this was like maybe 3 years ago. And so to hear, this tradition where humans came from the trees.
Yeah, it's lovely. Well, the Volva in the Poetic Edda speaks to it as well. She talks about so after so the beginning of time was just the gaping void, the Gnunga gap, and nothing more. Then ice and fire began to form around the gaping void and created the roaring sound. So that's kind of the Big Bang, you know?
Yes, yes.
And ice and fire, when they come together, they have this strange interaction. One of my favorite things to do is to put a cauldron of fire out in the snow. The snow will melt away, and then it starts to kind of reform as reaching forward as little icy fingers, crystals of ice that are kind of ache. Fire and ice kind of ache for each other in a beautiful way. And it makes this sound, and in there is the roaring sound, the howling sound. And so sound becomes the key note, that key note of creation of the universe. And then Abdumla, the creator cow, comes to hear this sound, and she comes down and starts to lick on that icy rime that has reformed around the ice. So one of the first images that we have, the first gendered being in the world, is a milk cow. And her teats fill Gnunga Gap and nourish the growth there. And she licks out of the ice this being who becomes a sort of prototype for the giants and the heroes that come afterwards. So it's one of the cow's horn, is one of the first icons that we have. And I've got my little, can you see that?
Yes, yes.
So this is a replica of what's called the Venus of La Soul. And it is 20,000 years ago, when the Ice Age, before Scandinavia and the British Isles was even uncovered from the ice. We have a picture of this woman, and she's holding this horn, and it's got 13 stav marks on it, marking the 13 moons. And she's got it in one hand, and she's got her hand on her womb, and she was covered with ochre, red ochre. And so it's this idea of the creator cow that nurtured us through the Ice Age nurtures us still. And so that's one of the very first. So I use the horn in ceremony, but I use oftentimes the blowing horn, and I can blow a note. Just I'm not sure if it'll tweak out but
go for it.
So it's got
Very nice.
fun sound to it. And so then after Adumla licks free this being starts to make other beings, and Ymir is sprouting off all these creative creatures, these giants and these dwarves and all these things. And then Bur and Bestla, two giants that are differentiated as male and female, create the three brothers, Wold, Vili, and Ve. Odin and his two brothers, Vili and Ve. And Woldin means the spirit. So Old is spirit and Odin is the spirit. And Vili means will, and Ve means holiness. So spirit, will, and holiness begin to take stock of Gnungagap and how it's getting filled, and they carve Ymir up into pieces. So it's like spirit, will, and holiness are dividing the roaring sound into order and organized sound, creating the music of the spheres, if you will. And they are looking on their creation, and some of the blood spills all around and almost drowns out some of the creatures. But some of the Yuttans, a couple of the Yuttans, hide inside of a tree trunk. So that kind of gets to it. And that tree trunk is the trunk of the world tree that holds the 9 worlds together. So they, let's see. So then they are walking along and they see 2 branches washed up on the shore. And one is called Ask and one is Embla, ash and elm. So Woad gives them breath and inspiration and spirit. Vili gives them will and consciousness. And Ve gives them holiness and a pleasant hue. You know, the health and holiness. Our health and holiness are cognates of the same word.
Right.
And so they become the first, Elm becomes the first women, and Ask becomes the first men. And so when I talk about connecting with the world tree, I say when we breathe out, our mother's breathing in. Breathing in our what we breathe out, she's breathing in. And when she breathes out, we are being nourished with that oxygen, so that our waste product feeds the trees waste product feeds us. We're combined, and there are soul parts. There's a soul part called, let's see, now I'm gonna, the Fera, Ferah, the Fera soul piece is the piece that connects us to the rest of the natural world through our lineages as tree.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there are prototypes, and this I think is maybe what you might have had in your vision, is that there's prototypes of humanity that are hidden inside the trunk of the tree, so that when Ragnarok comes and this world ends, the new tree kind of opens up, and the new leaf and leafraster, life and life bringer, emerge from the trunk of the new tree and begin to populate this new world that is ruled by fairness and justness and abundance. So I would guess you're probably part of that new tree group. Just that's how you feel to me.
Thank you. Now I see on your back wall there you have a staff. Is that your staff or?
Yeah, it's one of many. I have several different people ask me, so how do you get your sacred staff? And I said, well, if you go where there's trees, you'll probably trip over one. So I have some that are birch, some that are plum. They're all ones that I have collected and that I've asked permission of the tree to use. And some of them I have made runes from, as well as a staff from. And this one is one of my favorites because my last name, even though it is a name in Norwegian, it actually comes from Latvian. My father's people are from Latvia. and it's Tauring. That G should be an S with a little dash on, a little V kind of on top of it.
Okay.
And Tauring means butterfly in Latvian, and Tauring means rope, the rope making people in Norwegian. So sometimes I say, well, it's the rope making people that the towering comes out of. Once the cocoon is finished, we bust out of it and do our thing.
Right, right.
But when I was starting to use the staff, the use of the staff as an instrument is one of the pieces of Volva Stav, and that's, I think, something that a lot of people are interested in. Can you see me well enough?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So the staff itself creates Isa, the ice rune, singular rune, the single line. And then when we put the cross stick on it, it creates the rune Naudis, which is fire.
Is this the one? Is this the one you're speaking of? I don't know if you can see it very well.
I don't know where I put my cheater glasses, but probably.
I think that's it. I think that's it.
The one with, it looks like that.
Yes.
Yeah. So Isa and Naudis, ice and fire, come together, and those are the first elements of creation, right? We just talked about ice and fire, Isa and Naudis coming together. So the use of the staff as a, and usually if I'm, the full equipment is a broom handle, a wooden spoon, and a cutting board. Norse people are nothing if not utilitarian. I always say if there's a whole lot of hoopla and stuff you have to buy, it's probably not Norse.
There you go. There you go.
I think my Facebook is on. I'm getting little Facebook dings. I don't know if you can hear that. People are tuning in, I think. So, so the idea of using the staff as a rhythm instrument doesn't have any particularly direct correlation in the Eddas, except for the one place where in the Lokasena, he accuses Odin of being unmanly because he beat on the vet as Volvas do. And the vet is a questionable term. People aren't entirely sure, but I've heard it translated as to the barrel lid. So beating on the barrel lid. And there was no use of drums in Norse tradition. There weren't even rim drums or anything. The Sami, of course, they had a long tradition of drums. But the Norse people, there's no mention of drums in any of the Eddas or sagas. There's no evidence of drums in any of the graves that we have found, but there is all sorts of evidence of wooden staffs with a lot of times the finial or the top piece of the staff was the part that was preserved because the wood itself was deteriorated. And all the way into the Bronze Age. So we're talking a good 1,500 years before the Viking era. These grave finds of these women's graves that they first thought must belong to some great chieftain because they were so much treasure. Well, they were women's graves. They were staff-carrying women's graves. One of the finials that's sort of most famous is it has the shape of an owl head or a hooded bird.
Okay.
In the exhibit, you'll find an elaborate, beautiful finial for Volva's staff. But the idea of doing rhythm with it, I tried to find some material in the folk tradition about it, and there's a living tradition of using the staff for rhythm in Latvia, where the staff carrier deities were Velna and Ragna. They were the god and goddess of the underworld in Baltic tradition. And then later they were translated to wizard and witch. And then later, Velna became the devil and Ragna was forgotten altogether, as it happens. So the use of the staff, and in Latvian tradition, then they hang jingles on it like this. Let's put this one on first. And it's called the Velna Bungas, which means the devil's drum. And so that is a living tradition in Latvia that I have only touched on just a little bit. But then, so 10 years ago, here's something your viewers might find strange and interesting about me. 10 years ago, I took my first trip to Norway as a contestant on a Norwegian reality show.
Okay. Awesome.
It was like, wow. And the show is called Alt for Norge. That's everything for Norway. And we were 10 Americans and we were supposed to compete for a chance to meet our relatives. And what was so amazing is that the whole thing was like ancestor and Freya led. Like I'd been writing grants to try and get to Norway to study the inherited cultural grief that might be, I understood it from the Norwegian American perspective. I really wanted to go and study it in Norway. I couldn't get a grant for it. No matter what, I tried. And then I had a friend give me a rune reading, and he goes, "Your ancestors are just at the door. They are just at the door, Kari. I don't know what's going to happen, but you're going to need to be ready for this." And I'm like, oh. So then that Yule, that Christmas, my sister brought a thing from the Minneapolis Star Tribune, and it said, "Wanted Norwegian Americans who are interested in their heritage and have never been to Norway." And I'm like, oh, and their name is Kari. So I applied for the show, and I'll tell you what, nothing brings out a culture's dysfunctions better than reality TV. I learned so much. It was phenomenal. It was 10 years ago this May.
Very good. So did you get to meet your Norwegian relative?
I did not, because I did. So here's the irony of reality TV. I lost in Gudvangen, which is the valley of my my grandmother's father's people, and I lost at being the best Viking. Even though I could translate everybody's names into runes and I could sing from the Volva, I lost the TV competition piece. So it was really, really interesting. But I went back in 2011 with my mother, who'd been there many times, and I've gotten to become close to all of my relatives there. I'm very fortunate to have such wonderful family there, and I was back in 2011 with my mother, which was important to meet the elders through an elder.
Yes.
Was just much better than having met them on a TV program. So, and then I was back in 2014 and 2016, and I'll be going back in 2020. My cousin Kari and her wife Anna are having their 20th wedding anniversary on September 2020. September 20th, 2020. So, yeah. But anyway, but I met a man on this show who was a very studied Scandinavian, Norwegian folk dancer. And he saw me, doing this and singing, and I'm singing, and that's just part of the song that I learned from Mike and Elsie's songbook. And he looks at me and goes, "We have a thing. We have a staff song." And I'm like, "You do?" I've been looking and looking. And he's like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Well, what is it?" And he goes, "It's the bear hunt ritual song and dance from Trysil." And I said, how can I get a hold of it? And he goes, there's an article. And then we got put on the bus, and I never saw him again until 2011, when I finally came to him. I'm like, give me the song. I need the song. So the song appears on my my CD, Nickin' and Bear.
Wait a minute, say that again, the name of the CD?
It's called Nickin' and Bear, or Nishin, depending on what side of the fjord you're on. And the Nishin, or the Nickin, is the water spirit that is responsible for bringing a lot of the tunes that fiddle players and singers learn up from the water, and also tends to grab women, powerful women, and bring them underneath the water with them. So, and then the bear spirit is one of the powerful animal spirits in Scandinavia, and also very much one of the favorite shapes to for the underground people to shapeshift into when they're wandering around during the daytime. So the song about the bear hunt ritual is on there, and it basically describes the bear hunt. And I start by telling the story of this, one of the stories in there. The last time that this song was sung, these older women from up on the Sekdep, which is the high mountain farm, and it was after World War II, so it was just the spring after World War II, and the Nazis had damaged Norway tremendously. They had, and that's one of the reasons why Norwegians are still irritated with Sweden, because Sweden let the Nazis march right across and occupy Norway, and it was devastating. There was very little food. People's homes were occupied and burned down if they weren't allowed to be occupied by Nazi troops. So it was really a tough time in Norway. And this bear was harassing the animals on the upper farms. And so they got this group together, and they got the bear, and the women were so glad that they threw down on all fours, because the dance, it's like you have to do push-ups in a circle around the bear carcass, one direction with one hand and one direction with the other hand. And these women were doing this and singing the song the whole while that they were, I mean, these were, women that were even a little older than me. I think the youngest one was 57, and I'm only going to be 53, and I don't think I could do it. So 50, 60, 70-year-old women doing this song. So it's a pretty cool piece, but yeah. So I did, and the accompaniment is to the staff. But I also believe that probably it originated with the spear, with it being a spear, because that was the main tool that every farmer would have for if they were conscripted into the war, in any of the various wars. Everyone had was able to get a spear. Few people got swords. Few people brought axes. Most people had spears. But anyway, that's a whole other.
Well, okay, so I wanted to go back to the Volva Stav.
Yeah.
Superior woman. So she prophesies, correct? Like what should be.
Right.
And what I've heard, and you can let me know if through your studies or your understanding if this is true, I've heard that when the staff carrier woman prophesies, she doesn't understand the prophecy, and a man who I guess is of the same sort of stature is the one that has to then interpret that prophecy. Or
I've heard that before.
Okay, all right. Okay.
No, I don't know where you got that information. Not come out of my tradition.
So then the Volva Stav the
So,
Stav carrier woman,
yeah,
is she's like a self-contained unit. There, that power is from her tradition and from the elder women. So this is completely and uniquely a female tradition.
yes, Volva means staff carrying woman. If a man was going to do this work and learn it the way Odin did, and some men did learn it, they did need to take on the female aspect.
Okay.
So there was a grave find recently that they thought was a woman that was a vulva, and they DNA tested, and it was a man in a dress in full regalia of women's power with a staff. And there's speculation as to whether they were castrated or whether they were, what the actual kind of rules around it was. But also think about it in terms of it's a 2,000-year tradition as well, from the Bronze Age to the Viking Age. That's 2,000 years of historical precedence of powerful women doing their work.
Right, right. And, speaking of which, in many traditions, and I think like the indigenous Americas, people like that were considered two-spirit.
Yes, yes. And I really think that was part of the tradition. I can't prove it through any known historical records,
Mhm.
but this whole thing about men having to interpret what a woman is speaking is a very strange thing to hear.
Maybe I misunderstood it. That could be.
And that might be somebody else's tradition that they developed in the modern era.
Mhm.
Uh, one of the things for Volva Stav is that we don't lose our consciousness. We don't succumb to being spirit filled like some sort of
Or in
Pentecostal.
a trance.
We don't go into. There are, for example, Diana Paxson in her work in the West Coast. She's developed it in tandem with her understanding of Greek oracular sage, as well as her experiences with hoodoo and some other pieces. And so what she does is not much like what I do. It's similar. It has some similar threads throughout, but it's very much different. Um, one of the things that repeats throughout the Eddas is this phrase of self guide yourself,
Mm.
self come into yourself. It's the first spell that the Groa, the Volva, who is speaking from the grave to her son, who has to go and find the healing goddess in Helheim. And she says, the first thing I will teach you is to shake from your shoulders that which seems shocking and guide yourself back to yourself.
Mm. Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah.
Can you say that one more time? Can you say that one more time?
So she says, the first, and I have it. I have it in Old Norse, but I don't have it memorized. But
Okay.
To shake off your shoulders that which shocking seemeth, and come yourself back to yourself. Odin, when he's hanging on the world tree, he says, "Self fra self mer, self to myself I come."
Mm.
And it is so important in Norse tradition, as I've learned it, not just through the material available, but through my own heritage. This idea, my grandmother teaching me, pray in nature to come into your a better understanding of yourself in relation to God. Come through yourself.
Yeah, know thyself.
Know yourself.
Yeah.
Know yourself. And so anybody who's doing work as a Volva for other people and hasn't healed their own family of origin urlog is, to me, a false prophet.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
You can't prophesy on somebody else's heritage until you know your own. And that's part of what I teach in terms of the greater community picture, is that we can't be useful to any other culture group and helping them preserve their root systems if we don't know what ours are. So it has to start with our own identity, our own root piece. That is a way in which we can then start identifying ourselves as people of culture rather than as people of race.
Amen.
And we can move the conversation from race to culture. We can all have a good time.
Yes, that was so beautifully said. That is so beautifully said.
It's words that come from Elder Atum from the African American diaspora in North Minneapolis, who invited me to come in and present my piece of culture to the African American community there. And that was something that she looked me in the eye and said, and it was something that has been imprinted on my soul, that I give her credit for those words.
Yes.
That we move from race to culture.
Yes. That's what I always try to, I dislike that term race. We are various cultures and ethnicities, sometimes interwoven. Yeah.
Most of the time interwoven.
Yes.
Just like the plants, you know.
Yes. And gosh, we could go, oh my goodness, I have the chills. We could go on forever, but I don't want to right now.
One last thing about race, though.
Yes, ma'am.
If we go back to the absolute very first meaning of race, it means the stream from which you issued. The stream from which you issued. So if I'm being completely honest, I'm from the race of Mississippi because I come from that river.
There you go.
That's all I want to say about that.
So as we go ahead and try to wrap this up and bring it to an end, but I wanted to, let people know about your book, The Runes and a Deeper Journey. Can you give a little bit of background, maybe just a little bit about this book and why you feel that this book is important and why this book was important to you? And this is the second I have here, the second edition.
Yes. The first edition came out in 2007, and it's kind of funny because David DeYoung, who edited the book, in about 2000, 2001, he said to me, "When are you going to write a rune book?" And I'm like, "Why should I write a rune book? There's a whole bunch of them out there." And he says, "Yeah, but you have such a poetic way of speaking about the runes and so much sort of knowledge that doesn't appear in the other books." And so I wrote him a little book called The Little Rune Book with little haikus, and I said, "Here's your book." And he goes, "Well, that's cute, but that's not my book." Okay. So in 2006 at Yule, we began the process, and I randomly picked a rune, and then I stream of consciousness wrote about it. I pulled some of my notes from the scholarship around it, and I put together chapters, and when I felt they were finished, I'd send them to David. Then in spring equinox, he randomly pulled runes to decide which one he was going to edit first. And then by summer solstice, we put them all in a row, and it told this amazing story. And so the thing that makes my book different is that it is 30 years worth of living with these runes as well. And the stories that I understand from living in a land that has the actual things, birch, ice, lake, cow, all the things that the runes represent are in my environment and I grew up with. And so go barefoot through the cow pasture. Fay, who means something very different to me and to the people that I know who had to milk a cow every day, twice a day, or they wouldn't get their butter money, you know. So, so that's, I think, that's why it's a deeper journey, because it pulls those scholarship pieces in a storytelling way about my life around it. And then it is available as an app as well. So you can get it for your iPhone or your iPad. I'm going to have to do a Kickstarter to get it translated to an app for Android, because that's an expensive process. And then I have these other two CDs I wanted to mention.
Okay.
These also came out in 2016. Ljos and Svart. Ljos is the light elves, and this is songs and poems and charms for spring to summer. And there's Old Norse, Finnish, Swedish, a little bit of German. I have to make the announcement that I mispronounced one of the German words. It should be Fest am Himmel, sogar haben wir genug, not Fest am Himmel. Just so, you know. And that's a hard part about doing all these different languages.
Yeah.
So then this is Svart, and this is the dark half of the year, or the Svart elf, or the black elves, and black meaning that kind of darkness that you get when the sun doesn't rise.
Right.
And that's something that's understood in Nordic climates, that whole days of no sunlight. And on this one is the Voluspa. I sing some verses from the Voluspa in Old Norse, and there's some Swedish and some Finnish, but there's also one called Journey, which is a 17-minute Stav journey with a group of people, and we just took a live take of this Stav journey through the world tree, so that people can experience what group journeying, active principled group journeying process feels like. Everything in Norse tradition is an active principle. Even passivity is an active act. And it manifests in the runes, it manifests in the dances and the songs, the folk traditional dances, and songs have runic intertwinings that I was able to get an actual folk arts grant from the state of Minnesota to explore that piece. And so all of these pieces come together to create a total fabric of culture that is really important to pull all those threads together if you really want to understand what Norse cultural spirituality looks like.
Mm-hmm.
It's important to immerse in the whole culture, just as with any other culture. So I encourage people also to learn the folk songs, in learning the languages and learning the dances. Those are all important parts of what it means to be a Volva in the Volva Stav method.
Right. And one last question, Kari. I apologize.
I could go on and on. Honestly, I don't have anything better to do than to talk to you. You're a lot of fun.
Thank you. So one last thing that, at least for now, and I would love to have you back again in the future, with the runes, people love to use the runes, to foretell the future, a divination. What is your personal perspective on the use of the runes? How do you use the runes?
Well, so to use the runes in divination is to understand that there's not a future tense. And so I do a real quick 3-rune pull, and I don't have the runes. My husband makes the runes for me out of birch and woodburn stems, so they're beautiful. And I forgot to grab a bag of them, but
now, do you sell those?
We don't sell them commercially because they're so time consuming.
Okay.
To do, and so we only do a few sets at a time. And when I have them on me, I sell them. But we stopped selling them on the website because the demand was so high, and he was just like, I can't I can't keep up with this
Right.
unless we mechanized the process, and we don't want to do that.
Exactly.
Everybody else does that.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
but if somebody was really truly interested, they should email me from my website, Kari@karitauring.com. So I have people hold the runes themselves, ground and center in the world tree, pull three, one for Urd, one for Verdandi, and one for Skud. Then I read what is the Urd rune, and it tells us what brings them to the place where they're questioning. One for Verdandi, what is opening up in the now that they need to take clues from, and then Skud, what they should do, what is by necessity what they ought to do. So usually that's usually all that is needed for a rune reading, because it gives people a clear understanding of the energy that is moving through the Nordic principles, and it gives them a clear idea of what they should do. So if someone says, "Am I going to have, babies in the future?" The school rune might say, "Find a mate."
Right, right.
Because that kind of future is so intangible when you live on a 45-degree angle with your goats. The future is so tenuous, and it is so it's a fool's errand to chase after it.
Yeah.
And so to just be in the now, understand past precedents, and figure out what it is you need to do to grow the kind of past you want to have.
Right.
That's what the rune reading is really about.
Right.
Of course, they are also used in healing. They are rune for one of the women in the Volva Stav guild is a midwife, and she uses the Bear rune, birch rune, often. Um, there's just people say, well, how do I get my rune set? And I'm like, well, first, you can have a rune set if you want to, but that's also kind of modern. The runes can be seen in any tree. If you know how to write them, if you know how to read them, those are the first two things Odin says. Do you know how to write? Do you know how to read? Then you can find them in nature anywhere. And so you need only close your eyes, look up into the tree. And people say, what about rune reversals? I say, well, are you looking at the roots, or are you looking at the branches?
Right.
Are you on the side of a lake looking at the reflection of them? What's reversed about it? So, and I would be remiss if I didn't also say that the use of runes, the runes I use are from 200 AD. And so they predate the Viking era by 500 years. And the use of runes in the racist period of Germany to is a cultural appropriation of the true culture for purposes that have nothing to do with the root culture. And I need to make that clear. The neo-Nazi people wandering around these days are using the Othel rune on their flags. That one that goes like that.
Yes, yes.
Well, you know what that rune means? Inheritance. And in an Urlag sense, any hate that they are projecting by the use of that rune is the hate that they're going to inherit.
Yes.
So they are on their own. They don't have anything to do with the root cultural pieces. There was no such thing as racism in Old Norse tradition, and it has no place in our modern world.
Yes. Yes.
Just to make sure that people know where I stand on that one.
Yes, thank you so much. And I would like everybody to check out Kari's website, karitauring.com. It is in the chat, and I will put it in the description below. Do you sell your book through your website?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So you can find her CDs on her website, different articles. Please support the website through purchasing the book directly from her, which I didn't know when I originally got the book. Because I think I found, I can't even remember how I found you, but I found the book.
You know, Amazon has it. Everybody's, you know,
Right, yeah.
it's okay. And as long as the information is getting out there. Also, the Volva Stav manual I have put out there for free download because I just really want people to have the information.
Yes.
And I, of course, appreciate the support. So, yeah. And if you're on the East Coast, I will be in Portland, Maine, and Portsmouth teaching this next coming week. And you can
Nice.
find that out on my website as well, on the events page.
Well, let me know when you make it to Philly.
You'll be the very first person I let know.
Or New York City. I'm like right between those two places and would love to meet you in person. So thank you very much, Kari, for being with us today. It took a little bit of time for us to make this happen, and we're here.
Here we are, just in the nick of time.
Yeah. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining us on the live chat. And
are there questions from the live chat that I should
okay. And Naisha, I get that all of the time. I think it's my energy. Naisha says that I look like Lisa Bonet. I don't really think I look like her, but I think I must be a soul sister of hers. We have a very similar soul energy. And let's see. Let me type in the chat to see if we have any questions for Kari before we go. Any questions? Because I think we're running on a 30-second delay. Okay, so if anyone has, I think Naisha might have had a question earlier. She wanted to know if animals can be ancestors.
Not particularly in a Norse traditional perspective in terms of soul sharing, but deified ancestors can appear as animals.
Interesting.
And that's called a philia, or a follower. And so the Disir, the female deified ancestors, sometimes appear to us in animal form. And so that if you are having an animal that follows you, it may be an ancestor in animal form, but not in the animal itself. Does that make sense?
Yes.
In Norse perspective. Yeah.
Very good. Very good. And I have one last question. Are those bells? Are those bells?
Yeah. They're cows. They're cowbells. So sometimes in my performances, I'll do a cow call, which is kind of become sort of a popular thing on YouTube, these pruning and these kula. But I'll use them at the beginning of performances. Should I try a kula?
Oh, yes. Yes, please, please, please.
So, det kommer en dyr och tar dig om nejda. Och mamma pussar no mikta. That means, come cow. A wild animal's coming to get you. And then the cow says, oh no, my mother will surely watch over me.
That's so sweet.
And this is a billy goat horn.
Okay.
It's also a nature instrument that I use. It's very hard to use for me. And then this is a willow flute, which is a string flute and is really only meant to be played between whenever the sap rises and whenever it dries and cracks, which takes us about to summer solstice. And so it's
Very nice. Very nice. And how about the last little item that looks like either a gourd or some kind of bladder or something?
Okay, and this
Maybe it's neither.
is, it's a cup.
Okay.
The wooden cup is, this one I got from my grandmother, and it's from Norway. And the wooden cup was something that was hanging on pretty much everybody's belt, because this, even today in Norway, the streams all come from the glacier runoff.
Oh,
So all the water from the streams is drinkable. So when you're hiking or walking in the woods and you're thirsty, you can just take your cup and drink. And it's also a vessel for that you would put the porridge in for the Nissa or the Norns to make Nornagryt, or any other offerings that you want to make, is good to put in a wooden cup like this. Yeah.
very beautiful. Very beautiful. Oh my gosh. Okay. I can keep going on and on.
Could we do a series? I think
Yes. Yes, most definitely. So,
Yeah.
so when I bring us to an end here, is actually, now that you mentioned that, as you were talking, I was thinking, you know what, it'd be nice if we can like go through this book and I have all these fantasies in my head. So yes, most definitely.
Okay. I'm all for it.
Okay, so once I bring this to an end, don't hang up. You know,
Okay.
disconnect this, don't hang up. We can have a few words before we go. And I'm going to take my 20-year-old, we're going to go to the gym and
Woohoo!
work out. So
I know, right? Make sure we don't get our bat wings too soon.
yeah, I'm working on that. I'm working on that. Okay. So again, thank you everyone for being here, for participating. I'm looking over there because that's where the chat is. And even though I don't see people, I see their words. So for me, they are physically present. And thank you for everyone who's going to watch this in the archives, in the repeat. Please feel free to share this video. Please check out Kari Tauring's website. It's going to be in the link below. And as we bring this to a close, I would just like everyone to just take a moment to take a nice deep centering breath. And I just want to take a moment to remember our ancestors and all those who have come before us. I'm telling Priestess Heart, I wish you peace and great bliss. Until next time, keep going. And thank you. And bye-bye.